Hi, everyone. It's David Harwell. I'm your presenter for today. We're going to be talking about an introduction to careers in industry. We have some possible careers that you can try on. We'll talk about. We have some case studies. And we will talk about why businesses do what they do. If you have specific questions for today, let us know that. Also, it'd be great to know where you're coming from. I think we have a good representation across the U.S. Also see some familiar faces. Good to see you, Lisa. And we have I think only one person from outside the U.S. right now, and that's Francis. So as you come in, type your questions into yeah, hi, Lisa. Yeah, good to see you. So type it into the question box, and that way we'll be sure and get to your question. Tell us where you're joining from, what the weather's like there. We're broadcasting today from Washington, D.C. in the United States. So in the East Coast, we've been having cold weather, but today is okay. Scattered showers. I can see sunshine out there right now. It'd be a good place to be, but not as good as being here with you. So glad to be here. And we'll talk about industry in a minute. Yep, Lisa is in St. Louis, cold, gray, dreary. One of my favorite kind of days. It's a good kind of day for a webinar, right? Who wants to be out in that when you could be here? Riverside, California, sunny and 60 degrees. So that's Geraldine. Good to meet you. Good to see you. So as you're joining in, we will start the webinar in about 4 minutes. What I'd love to know is where you're joining from. And if you have a question that you want answered in today's webinar, we're going to talk about jobs, possible careers in industry. We're going to do that through a couple of case studies. And we'll also talk about business cycles in industry, a little insight into why companies do what they do, why they make the decisions that they do and act the way they do. Oh, Kirsten, Phoenix, Arizona. Beautiful weather, sunny and warm. Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that with us. It's you're having a nicer day weather-wise than we are here in Washington, D.C. So you should get out and enjoy it, but not until after the webinar. Wait till after. We'll start the broadcast in a few minutes. We're about 3 minutes out. Until then, if you have a question that you want to make sure that we answer today, I would love to hear from you. Just type it into the question box. And also let us know where you're joining from. So we have people from both coasts of the United States and all places in between. We also have at least one person coming from outside the US. So I know we have somebody from the UK. Just checking email addresses here. Sometimes I can tell, sometimes I can't.
Well, I saw at least one from Canada as well, Dave.
Oh, Canada. Yeah. Well, good. We're glad you're here too.
I think he actually was a participant in Virtual Poster Showcase.
Okay, great. Well, welcome aboard. So we're going to start the broadcast. That's Nathaniel's voice, by the way. I'm David Harwell. I will be your presenter for today. Nathaniel's going to be your host. And we've even got Eric on standby. He's our emergency help. So it's always good to have somebody that can help us out in an emergency. So we're just getting to know each other before the webinar, which will start in about 1 minute. So if you have a question, let us know that. Also, let us know where you're joining from today. We'd love to hear that. You can do that in the question box. I'm going to pop out and let Nathaniel take over because we're about to start the webinar.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Eric, if you want to go ahead and hit that record button, we'll start right now. Oh, great. Okay, so we are recording already. Um, Dave's taking over controls right now. And while he's doing that, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction here. Welcome, everybody who is here. Thank you for attending this webinar, part of our professional development series titled Introduction to Careers in Industry. A few logistics to cover before we begin. Throughout the session, we're going to be using the GoToWebinar tools to help you interact with both us and your fellow audience members. First of all, we're going to be doing some polls throughout the session. You'll see the first of those in just a moment. Secondly, we will be doing a Q&A session at the end. So any questions that you have, feel free to ask them at any point. And once we're done with the presentation, we're going to use the rest of the time to answer all of those questions. We also will have a few free response questions that we have for you, and you're going to type your answers to those in the question box as well. And I know that some of you did type in your responses to Dave's questions about the weather and where you're coming from, but if you didn't, you can do that and add in those questions in the question box, which is on the right-hand side of the control panel. You'll also find in that control panel a tab for handouts. We have the slides available in that handouts tab, and you can download that at any time during the presentation. Lastly, as I mentioned just a minute ago, the webinar is being recorded, and so you'll receive a link to get that recording in just a few days. With all of that out of the way, I'm going to pass the mic over to Dave Harwell. Take it away, Dave.
Well, thanks, Nathaniel, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's been good to get to know many of you before the webinar started, and thanks for letting us know where you're coming in from. Now, today we're going to talk about careers in industry. It's going to be an introduction. We won't get to everything. We can't do everything about industry today, but we hope to cover the basics for you, and then we'll follow up with additional webinars and online materials based on the questions that you asked today. So it's important to ask your question. Even if we don't get to all of them today, we will follow up with you, and it helps us to plan other webinars. So before we start, I want to find out what you know about jobs in industry. And one of the very basic questions is, how many people are employed in industry? Let's talk about new PhD graduates. So new PhD graduates, what percentage of them end up in industry? I'm going to throw it to Nathaniel, and he's going to conduct the poll. Okay, those answers are rolling in. We'll give you just a few more seconds to answer that. And yeah, go ahead, Nathaniel.
So it looks like almost everybody's answered. I'm going to give it just a few more moments and close it in 3, 2, 1. And here's the results. So it looks like 2% or 10% of the audience think that 2% will go into the industry. 14% think it's 12. About half of you said 35%, and another 30% said 51%.
Well, that is because this audience is well educated, and they know that for PhDs, about 35% are going to go into industry. So almost half of you are right, and I'm sure the rest of you wanted to be right. So that counts, right? If we look at other degree levels, for bachelor's, 69% is going to end up in industry. You can see that dark blue line in the center of the graph on the right, jobs by sector, those are the answers to the question. For master's degrees, MA and MS, it's 90%. So almost all of master's degree holders, new graduates, end up in industry. Almost all of bachelors end up in industry. PhDs, a little over half end up in academia. That's the light blue at the front of that graph. And then there are a couple of other sectors where folks end up.
Hey, Dave.
The red is government. Yeah, Eric.
This is Eric. So quick thing, we can't see your slides right now.
You can't.
No. But you sound great.
Well, that's all that really matters, right?
There we go.
All right, there we go. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm sure you anticipated how beautiful this slide would be. Let's start at the left, and then we'll work our way to the right. You can see what I wanted you to see from the graphic on the left that comes to us from the American Geosciences Institute, our colleagues over there. And they put together this cool infographic that shows that really no matter what you want to do, you can do it in industry or government or academia or nonprofits. And some of those jobs will involve research and some of them won't. So if you like research, that's fine. You have a list of jobs you can look at. If you don't like research or you want to come out of the field or out of the lab, there are possibilities for you there as well. And they're outlined many different possibilities. And now for sector, jobs by sector, for bachelor's and master's, we already went over, more than half are going to end up in industry. And in fact, almost all of bachelor's and master's students are going to go into industry after graduation. PhDs, most are going to go into academia, but just over half, that's all. 35% of PhDs also end up in industry. The red bar on the graph, that's government jobs, federal jobs mostly, although there are state jobs included in there. And the purple is nonprofit jobs or NGOs. Well, this is where you go. So if you get a bachelor's degree, the top 3 areas or top 3 job types within industry are environmental sciences, number 2 is oil and gas, and number 3 is information services. For masters, most of the folks that go into industry are going to end up in oil and gas, then environmental services. Then for third place, it's a tie between mining and research institutes. For PhDs, in industry, it's almost all research institutes. And then number 2, oil and gas. There's not really a third option here. There are options, but that's not where people are going. So if we look at industry, the top 2 are research institutes and oil and gas. Now, what roles do people play and in industry? Well, this is a concept that we call a value chain, and it's based on Richard Porter. He's at Harvard in the business school there. And what you'll see is over on the left is where a product, in this case, this value chain is set up for a product, a thing that you might produce, like a detector, or in the oil and gas industry, it could be the petroleum, or it could also be some commodity, like a metal. Any of those things are products that would be produced. So at the beginning of the process, you have exploration, research, and development. And that's where we do most of our work in academia. So those of you that are familiar, that are still in school, you're going to be familiar with academia, and you're doing this exploratory, this research part of the job. But that's not something that you can sell yet, right? And in industry, we have to get to a product that we can sell. So the next step in that process is product development. And this is mostly the domain of engineers. So the engineers are going to take your discovery and they're going to transform it into something that can be produced. So they've got to figure out a way to mass produce what you discovered. And they will figure out how to also put it in a form that people can use, right? So that's the product development piece. Mostly engineers in that bucket, but there are some other types of researchers. Then you have to make it, right? So that's the manufacturing process. So both creating the manufacturing process and maintaining that process. And that also includes the supply chain, because you've got to have all the materials to keep the process going. right? This is a place where a lot of our folks that look at risk management might work, or that may forecast storms, right? It's very important, or other natural disasters. Earthquakes can also disrupt your supply chain. So knowing what's happening, or what might be predicted, or what the probabilities of taking a certain route to your factory, between the supply area and the factory, that's very important information that companies need to know, because if they don't have the raw materials, then you have everybody in the plant just standing around waiting to make the product, but they can't because they don't have the supplies that they need. And next in line here is quality control and regulatory. So quality control is making sure that the product is of good quality, ready to go to market. Regulatory is related because that's related to the regulations of the state or the government, where the product is being developed, or the market where it might be deployed. You've got to make sure that you're meeting those regulations, and companies need experts that understand those regulations, as well as people that can document that they're following all those regulations. And then there's sales and marketing. And while you might not think of scientists being involved in sales and marketing, they really are. So marketing is more than just letting people know about a product. Marketing is also doing the research in the market to figure out what people want, what customers might want. So if you don't understand what the customers are doing, you can't ask the right questions to figure that out. Also, if you're trying to make a successful argument or sales pitch to them and you don't understand what they do, it doesn't work either. So the sales and marketing involves highly technical people. Now, there's also what we're describing as support functions along the bottom there. And we'll find scientists in those positions as well, but they might not be the jobs that you'd normally think of. So human resources is one example. If you're going to hire scientists, then you need to understand what they do. So there are usually at scientific companies, there are usually some scientists that work in HR and that recruit talent to do specific tasks. You got to be able to know how to find those people and how to ask them the right questions to see if they know what you want to do. There are people that manage intellectual property or patents, patent agents. Those are examples. People that do technical writing would be involved here. So maybe the reports, maybe writing up the regulations, maybe writing up those instructions on how to put something together, or how to use an instrument if we're making an instrument of some sort. And then there are management. Many scientists go on to be managers because if at least the first mid and lower level managers have to know what the people that they're managing are working on and understand that, so that they can prioritize it and help them get the resources they need. And then there are some other types of jobs that probably are not scientists. So the people that work in finance, maintenance, those other people that are essential to making a company grow and work, but aren't in the sciences. Okay. So let's look at our case study. And here's one that we made up for you today. So imagine that we're at this company. It's Remote Sensors Are Us. And what we do at this business is we create tools needed by scientists to record, archive, and analyze measurements made during remote sensing from airplanes and satellites. So if that's what we're going to do, that's the problem that we're going to solve, and the product that we're making are these sensors that you either deploy on an airplane or a satellite, then we're going to have to put together, in this case, two theoretical teams. Okay, so we have a project manager. The project manager's on both teams, so that person can coordinate efforts of the two teams and synchronize them, also manage resources, those sorts of things. Project managers, it's great if they have a scientific background. So you may, if this appeals to you, you might be a project manager. You would most likely need to get your PMP, so your project management certification, if you wanted to do that. And then on the project team, well, we want an analytical chemist, a geochemist, a botanist, and a GIS specialist. So the reason why we're doing that is because we're going to, the problem that we're going to try and solve is to use the spectroscopic signature of locoweed. That's Astragalus SSP, several species. And it's collected through satellite and airplane surveys of western rangelands in the US. So that's why we need a botanist, so that we can identify the locoweed. And analytical is this case, it's a spectroscopist that we need. Maybe the geochemist can help us out here too, because we need to figure out which frequency we're going to look at, what color we're going to look at, so that we can find the locoweed and not get it confused with everything else. And we're just going to do a visual survey based on the spectroscopic signature. So that's how that team was put together, the project team. So they're going to figure out what it is that you're detecting, how it is that you're going to detect it, and how are you going to read the results when you get them back, and how are you going to document it? So that documentation piece is the GIS specialist, because we also need to map this so that once we figure out where the locoweed is, we can go in and selectively target either mechanically or chemically to control the locoweed, to get rid of it, because it's one of those pests that poisons cattle, okay, and other livestock. Now, it's great to know what you want to do, but then you need the specialists that know how to build the instrument. So the project team is going to define what that instrument is, and then they'll hand it over to the instrument design team, which includes the project manager again, to make sure things are synchronized. We'll have an electrical engineer, a mechanical engineer, a software designer, quality control, and testing. We may even have an optics person or some other specialists that are involved here to build that machine. So I wanted to present this as one example of what you might do in industry in the context of a problem, so that you could see what it is, how it would be applied. Now, we could also have a service business. So this is where we're generating reports. Maybe we're doing consulting. We might be doing analysis of some sort, but we're not creating a thing. We're creating a report. We're creating knowledge. So that's, in this case, what the service industry would look like. And here we have a value chain. So at the beginning of the chain is where we start thinking about what it is that we're going to produce, what kind of report. And the way we do that is working with the client to ask them what it is that they need. Once we're clear on what needs to be produced, then we're going to go out and do the exploration or the research. And then we would come back and do data analysis and reporting to write up the reports that will help our client. That usually goes through some sort of regulatory or review, maybe by a senior scientist. If the report has to be signed off by a certified scientist of some sort, and then it's going to go to them so that they can check the work, validate it, sign off on it. And then marketing is part of this as well, making sure that we're producing the products that the customer wants. And we have many of the same support functions underneath there in the support functions bar. But the service industry is usually not as big. It doesn't take as many people to do the service industry. This could be one person. So if you're a consultant, you're going to go through this process and you'll play each one of these roles. If you're at a larger firm, then it may be divided up so that you have people that go into the field and get the data. You have other people that analyze it. You may have some data wranglers that get the data in the right format to be archived or to be analyzed. And then you have your data analysis people. And you might even have technical writers that their sole function is to put all the data and information in a particular format that the clients can consume. We also have a case study that we can look at here. So the example here is, and this is fictional, but it's based on something that could be real. So imagine after Hurricane Katrina, and that happened in August 2005, the floodwaters that covered New Orleans were actually pumped into Lake Pontchartrain. And the process took about 43 days to complete. Now, the residual waters contained a mix of raw sewage, bacteria, heavy metals, pesticides, toxic chemicals, and oil. So our fictional firm was brought in, and the fictional firm here is Hydrologically Speaking, and they were contracted to analyze the situation and, where necessary, craft remediation plans. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do the analysis. We're going to come up with the plans. We'll have to have those plans certified. And so there's 3 steps in this process. So we determine the scope of work and probable outcomes. We're also going to create a methodology for testing key contaminant levels in various media. So that could be in the groundwater, it could be in the soil underneath, it could be in water that's in an aquifer nearby or underneath. And we'll report the contamination levels compared to acceptable standards and determine probable contamination vectors. So if we look at the folks that are involved in the team, again, we have a project manager. And these roles might all be one person if this is a small consulting firm, or it could be a team of people if it's a larger company. So the project manager is going to make sure that we have everything that we need, including the people and the other resources. They're also going to make sure that we're producing results on time according to our schedule. We'll have our hydrologist to look at all things water, soil scientists to help us out when things touch dirt, geologists. We also need a hydrologic modeler. So that's to figure out where things are going. So if we have contaminants in the water seeping into the soils, and we know we have aquifers around the area. So what's the probability of a contaminant getting into the aquifer, and what's the probable route that it might take? If we're going to come up with a remediation plan, then we need to know where the toxin's likely to be and how we can remove it. We'll also have a civil engineer to help us with that plan of how to do the remediation. And we have our regulation specialist that would be familiar with what the ideal, or at least the minimal state of this of the environment should be when we're done with the remediation. So that's an example of what you might do in a service-based industry. All right. So those are examples of jobs that you might do. Well, let's talk a little bit about the actual product or service that you're providing. It's going to have a product life cycle, and we're going to show that through a fairly simple graphic here. This is often called the change curve, and you can see that this is the start of the process. We could put a 0 here for 0 performance. Instead of performance, we could also have money. You know, this could be dollars or any other unit of currency. This is also called an S curve because it looks like an S. It starts out going down, and it goes up for a while and then down again. And across the bottom is our horizontal axis, and in this case, that's going to be time. So over time, we have a change. And this, the time that it takes to go through this cycle, that I'll explain in parts in just a minute is called the life cycle of the product. Okay, so I have a question for you. If we're looking at the life cycle of the product, or the life expectancy of a product, from the time it's launched until it's no longer available, how long do you think that is? So.
All right, great. So yeah, so going right into our second poll question here, what is the average life cycle of product or service in the global market space? So your options are 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, or 7 years. And I'm going to give everyone some time to answer here. All right, so answers are starting to come in, and I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, and 1.
Great.
And here we go. So it looks like 50% said 5 years, 23% said 1 year, 15% said 6 months, and then the last 12% said 7 years.
Yeah, so this answer has changed over time. It also depends somewhat on the industry that we're in, but overall, the answer is it's much shorter today than it used to be. So a lot of you answered 5 years. That is the most common answer if you look in the literature. But I got to tell you, these days, it's usually much shorter, because there are things that come in, and we'll talk about some of those things. So in the environment, there might be another product. Somebody scoops you, they make something better, or people just get bored with that. They're disinterested, or technology comes along and computers can do it, so it's so somebody can get it cheaper from another place. So there's a lot of competition in the workplace that companies have to deal with. And so they pay a lot of attention to this life cycle of the product. So let's walk through what it looks like. In the beginning, this is what we call the formative stage. So I'm only showing you the beginning of that curve. And notice that we're going downhill here. So we're going into the red. So in terms of money, this is money invested in a product that doesn't exist yet, or a service that doesn't exist yet. During this time, we are doing research. Maybe we're finding how to build something, if it's an instrument, or another product base. So we got to figure out how to produce it. So there's a lot of effort from people, and a lot of money that it'll take to be invested in the company. Now, this is also when we do some experimentation to find out the right way of doing things. It's usually exciting. It's also, it can make you a little nervous. If you own the company, it's probably going to make you very nervous. You don't want to spend very much time here, but you want to make sure that you spend enough time that you get it right. Now, in academia, this is where we stay, right? So we invent something and then we're done with it. But in industry, we have to actually bring it to market. We have to manufacture it, and we have to recuperate our investment. In academia, it's a little different. You get your grant to do your research, and you just spend the money till it's gone. In industry, you actually have to pay that back. So the next stage is called the normative stage. And here's where we standardize our processes. We have incremental improvement, and we climb out of the red and into the positive area. So now we're actually making money. And it's important here that we make enough money to make up for the amount that we invested, right? And by the way, we still have expenses because, well, they're paying you and they're paying me and everybody else that works at the company. They'll have to keep the lights on. If you have equipment, you have to keep that rolling. And so all of that costs money and takes time as well. So we need to make sure the slope of the curve is is steep enough to maintain our the way that we're operating the company. So sometimes they would call that operating costs. So we want our profits to be greater than our operating costs. fact, we want there to be a margin. So the margin is the difference between what it costs to do what we're doing and what a customer is willing to pay. So that's how one of the ways that you generate or think about what you're going to charge for your service or product. Now, you're getting regular return on your investment here, but this doesn't go on forever. At some point, there's going to be what we'd call diminishing returns. Things are going to tank. You hope that it tanks slowly, but you don't know. When it starts to go down, or when that curve stops being linear and doesn't go up with the same slope, what you want to do is to figure out what your next product is. Now, this is what we call the maturity stage. So there are many companies that have faltered because they didn't recognize when a product became mature. And some people would say, hey, you're still above the red, you're still making money, what does it matter? Well, it matters because we're still paying all those other bills, still paying for you and for me, our salary. We're still paying for to keep the lights on in the company, in the building. And so it's important that we figure out some way to make up for the difference so that we can remain profitable and everybody can stay employed. During this time, people become frustrated. Sometimes you might take it personally, but you can't. You can't control what happens in the market. You can't control whether somebody comes up with a better idea. You just want to get there first. You want to have a better idea before they do. So you start thinking about the next big thing, and you want to think about it early. So while you're still in that middle stage where you're making a good profit, you'll take some of that profit and set it aside, maybe 10%, to invest in research. So you're starting to invest from the initial idea in a new idea so that you can jump from it. And okay, I admit it, I'm a chemist, I'm a little geeky here. I couldn't resist putting this purple arrow in here because it looks like an electronic transition to me. I just like that. So we're going to transition from our main product into our new product. And why is that important for us? It's important for us as employees of a company because we've got to recognize that we're not going to be making this same thing or providing the same service in the same way forever. We've got to be adaptable because the company has to adapt and evolve in order to stay profitable. And that means that we should help the company be profitable and adaptable by being adaptable ourselves. So when you're working in industry, if you recognize what's driving the company to do what it's doing, you can position yourself better. If you understand kind of the principles behind the business, then you can perform better. And if you have a choice of making two things and one's going to make more money than the other, and they both take the same time to get to market, well, choose the one that's going to make the more money. The greater amount of money, or maybe it costs less to develop, or you can get to market faster. So those are all sort of business acumen insights that are useful to have when you're thinking about working in industry. Okay. Also, when we're doing this, there's going to be a cycle of these ideas, one after the other, and we always want to keep the next one coming before we start seeing diminishing returns. If we line those up, you can see that it kind of simulates this longer period of return on investment. We stay in a profitable state by keeping those new ideas lined up. And so the practice of a company is that they will bring together these teams like were in our examples earlier, our case studies. And that group will develop a product or they will develop a service or work on that, and then the team breaks up and you form a new team. So if you're a hydrologist, you may not be with the same people always. You'll still be a hydrologist, but you'll be a hydrologist on multiple teams over time, as they're taking advantage of your expertise, and you're also working with others that have different areas of expertise that can best address the problem that you're trying to solve. So now I have a question for you. So what are the key skills or competencies that are needed to be successful in an industrial job? I'm not going to give you the answers this time. I want you to tell me. So type them into the question box. I'll give you just a moment to do that. Okay, Lisa, great answer, communication. Ability to work in teams, that's also a good one. Efficiency, thanks Wilson. Teamwork, flexibility, innovation, persistence. Thanks Heather. Productivity and time management, Kristalinda. Allison says organized. Technical know-how, that's from Catherine. Time management from Rachel. Flexibility from Macon. Geraldine, ability to take criticism. Yeah, that's true. You've got to be able to give it and get it. Also, adaptability and innovation from Thomas, interpersonal skills from Lisa. So those are all really good answers. We've done some research for you, and so we'll present some of those now. Here's what counts in industry. Yeah, you've certainly got to be an expert at what you do. That's why you went to school. That's why you're getting a degree. And that's what your degree tells your potential employer that you're able to do, right? So you have the skills, the technical skills necessary to do the job. It also helps if you have a business acumen. So understanding the process, the product life cycle, and what your role is in producing value or enhancing the value of either the product or the service that you're making, so that the customer will like it, or it'll be satisfactory to them, or that they're willing to pay for it. Do you have problem-solving ability? Are you able to collaborate? Now, we saw teamwork in many of the answers that you gave, and they're absolutely correct. Are you going to pursue excellence? Are you an innovator? Risk taker. This one seems weird, or at least it did to me when I was first learning about business. But jumping from one product to the next takes some chutzpah. You got to be willing to make that jump, and that's some tolerance to risk. Also, your leadership abilities. Now, nobody's going to have all of these, or at least these aren't going to be your number one. You can only have one number one thing that you're good at, right? But it's good to have some aspect of each of these. Now, another way to look at this list is here. This is a quick sheet that you can look at, and we've classified it into different types of skills or competencies. So under personal effectiveness, we have being proactive, having attention to details or adaptability. Now, you might not have all of the things under all of these columns, but knowing the combination that you do have may point you in the right direction for the type of job that you want to do. So if you have an attention to details, then you can find jobs where that's important. If you don't have an attention to details, then maybe you don't want to be in that area of work. So you're really trying to find the job that matches your preferences and your skills. And we talked about that some in a previous article that was in EOS, and that's it was called Finding. Nathaniel helped me out there. So it was Finding Your Fit. So Nathaniel,
Finding Your Fit. I'm actually going to send it to everybody right now.
Okay, great. And it looks like Lisa has also highlighted another article or in the question box, Nathaniel, and it's another article on evidence-based evaluation of transferable skills and job satisfaction for science PhDs. So we'll share that with you. Thanks, Lisa, for putting that in. And so you can see that there are several categories that are important here. So personal effectiveness, interpersonal skills, operations, and problem solving. So let's talk about, that's about you. Now let's find out about the companies. How are we going to do that? Well, for publicly traded companies, we can look at their financial performance. So that's what's on the right-hand side of the slide. This is Google Finance, but you could look at any of the finance websites. This is just one example. HU does not endorse Google, but we like their stuff. So you can see that there's a graph in the center here. Let me use my pointer. All right, so this is showing the stock price for Alcoa. And you can see it's coming up. You can also see that there are letters down here at the bottom. I didn't copy the whole screen, but over on the right, there would be a series of articles. And if we clicked on the letter N, for example, it would bring up the news story associated with that point in time. So you can get some insight into what the company's doing and why the stock price may be reacting to what they're doing. Down here at the bottom, you can see this is these are related companies. So Rio Tinto also looks at minerals. They're a mining company. BHP Billiton, they do other commodities and metals. And there's Aluminum Corp down here at the bottom as well. So you can look at their competitors, find out more about what they do. There's usually a description of the company. If whether they're public or not, there's going to be a company website. So look there. It will usually give you an indication of the company's values, how they practice, what they do. You may see their strategic plan. If they're public, they're going to have their stockholder reports published. They have to do that annually. If they're private, they don't have to do it, but they may have reports for potential investors that they have posted. Financial performance, you're probably not going to know that unless they're a public company, and if they are, then they're going to be on one of the markets, and you can do a search in one of the finance engines. And then check your networks. So see who works where, because you may know somebody that works for that company. And one of the best ways to look at networking is on LinkedIn. So here's an example for Alcoa. And you can see, and this is for me, my relationship. So I can search for the company, and then I'm going to look for first connections. I don't happen to have any first connections at Alcoa, but I do have secondary connections. So Jim Levy, and then I have some third connections as well as other second connections. So I can send an email to them. I can also connect with them potentially and ask questions about the company. Now, if you do that, don't go straight at them and say, hey, I want a job, give me a job right now, because they're probably not going to respond to you. So what you want to do is connect with them or send them an email and ask them if they have time for an informational interview, for example, so you can talk to them. You can also look for shared connections. So maybe I can't get directly to Jim Levy, but we have 80 shared connections. So that's 80 potential people that I could go through that are first connections to me, so I can ask them for an introduction to Jim. Or I may be able to ask them to make a recommendation on my behalf. Okay. And lastly, you can follow the company. So for any of the company pages, there's going to be a follow button, and you can click on that. And any news about that company that's indexed by LinkedIn is going to show up in your news feed. And when you're thinking about companies, you should also think about the size. because you're going to have everything from startup companies or one-person consultancies, maybe you start your own, to very large global enterprises. And your role at those companies changes. So at a very large company, you can specialize. So you can just write technical reports if that's what you want to do. At a small company, you've got to do more than one thing. So you've got to be a jack of all trades if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a company on your own. So think about the aspects that are related to the size of the company and how that relates to your personal goals. Now, if you want to have a corner office, well, if you own the company, then maybe you can do that if you're making enough money. But it's more likely that you're going to have greater hierarchy in a large company because you have to have a management structure to do that. So if title and rank is important to you, then go to a large company. At a small company, it's probably going to be pretty flat. You know, you have just enough people to do what it is that your company does, and they may all be at the same rank, they just have different roles. So those are some aspects of size. The last piece that I'm going to talk about here is the culture of the organization. And there are 5 different dimensions to the culture. There's structure. So is it centralized or decentralized? That means here we're talking about how decisions are made. So are they made by a central group of senior management, and then the decisions are passed down to the people that work at the company, or are they decentralized so that people on the front line are empowered to make changes? There are certain types of businesses where you need it to be centralized, other types where it needs to be decentralized. How fast does the company make a decision? Is it quick? Or do they take time to make a deliberate answer, a strategic sort of analysis of the situation before they make an answer? You know, if you're going to lose your patience in that kind of situation, then you don't want the deliberative type of culture. You'd want a fast culture. Then again, if getting it right is more important to you than getting it done quickly, then you're probably going to be more satisfied in a deliberative type of culture. Are they more focused on results, or are they more focused on process? So here an example might be an analytical company. So analytical companies or forensic companies have to get things right. They have to manage their process so that the information produced is valid and you know that it's correct, right? So it's more important to adhere to the process than it is to get the results. On the other hand, if you are making a product, you got to get it to the market pretty quick, because if you don't get it out there quickly, somebody else may get out a competing product, and once they're in the market and they're established, it's very hard to displace them, because everybody knows they're the ones that make a certain kind of instrument. And that's important too, because once people have designed the rest of their systems around that instrument, then it's harder for them to switch out unless your instrument is not only better, but significantly better, that makes it worthwhile to rebuild the rest of the system. Management style, controlling or empowering, that tends to go along with the central and decentralized. Also, the communication style is related here. So is it direct and open, or indirect and closed? So sometimes you have trade secrets. If it's in a highly competitive type of industry, you don't want your trade secrets to get out there. So there's going to be a few people that know all the plans, and other people that are involved are just going to know they're part of it, right? So that's indirect and closed, where you might have a small consulting firm where you're all doing groundwater analysis. It doesn't matter. There's no specific trade secret there. there you're competing on service. So the communications are likely to be open, and everybody knows the process. Everybody knows what's going on in the organization. So that completes today's webinar, the informational part. So we're going to go to Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to remind you, AGU Pathfinder is here for you. We have career advice, mentoring programs, travel and research grants, professional development workshops like this one, and also ethical and professional guidelines. You can find that all at pathfinder.agu.org. So Nathaniel, I think it's back to you, and let's do some Q&A.
All right, sounds great. So I'm just going to dive right in here. And if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to ask them. But we only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to just jump right in. So the first one I've got is, how do I market my technical skills from academia to get hired in industry?
Well, they're the same technical skills. What you need to do is figure out how to tell a story about what you did. And the formula that we usually use is to do context, action, result. So what was the situation like? Where did you display this skill? What type of science, what type of problem were you trying to solve? What was the action that you took? And what was the result that happened? And when you're doing these stories, you want to keep it brief. So what's the briefest way that you can say that and still get the skill communicated across? So this is usually going to be in your resume. So we have a resume article, a series of those that we can make available to you. They're on the job blog. The other place where you'll have to tell your story is in an interview. And we also have a couple of articles there in EOS for interviewing 101 and 102. We get into that particular skill in interviewing 102.
Great. And the next one is, let's see, most jobs in industries seem to require experience. How do I get hired directly out of my graduate program without any non-academic experience?
Yeah, so they know that, right? New graduates usually don't have that much experience in a company. You can get experience, not usually as a grad student. Usually it's as an undergrad, because you can do internships. Internships as a grad student also happen, but they're less common. You may also be able to work on a project with your professor that's for a company. But most of us are going to be doing purely academic research. So what's valuable to a company is the types of skills that you're picking up, because they're cutting edge. You know, you're learning, you're developing the new skills and technologies and information that's going to be valuable to that company. So that's your primary gift to the company. So think of it that way. You may be able to do some volunteer things to work in your community. Our text program looks at community challenges or problems that communities are trying to solve. If you can apply your knowledge in that environment, you have to do it for free because we're helping the community. But what you gain from that is some experience. So that's okay. One more bit. Another thing that can help you is international experience. So you may not have worked internationally, but many of our companies are global now. So understanding different cultures, being able to speak a different language, maybe studying abroad, either as an undergrad or a grad, can be helpful to you as well.
All right, great. So the next question's kind of in the same vein, but how would someone go from a science PhD in like the academia side of things, or the research side of things, and switch over to the management side of industry? Would they need to go back and get a business degree, or focus on other skills instead? For example, you said something about project management certification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so project management certification, PMP, requires some experience. So you can learn the skills and take the test, for the certification, but you don't get the full certification until you're able to apply what you learn. Companies know that, right? So if that's your path and you've already taken everything for the certification, all the learning, you've demonstrated that you have that, then many of those companies will go ahead and hire you in maybe a probationary role to give you enough time to gather that experience, and then they're going to expect you to go ahead and get your full certification at the end of that. You're kind of a bargain at that state, so so they like finding people like you. If you're looking at other forms of management, well, you know, how have you demonstrated management? Have you volunteered with an organization where you had a leadership role? Were you the did you have a leadership role in your laboratory? One of the things that I used to do, I did a postdoc because I went the academic route before I went into industry and nonprofits. And so I was the head postdoc. So I managed the finances for our research group. I managed the postdocs and other grad students, and I managed the grant writing process. So those are all things that I could talk about and would count as experience. Even though it wasn't in an industrial setting, it's still using the same skill sets. So that set of skills that I showed you in the tables, where we're looking at interpersonal skills, operational skills, leadership skills, what you want to do is find ways to document. So think of, when was a time when you displayed those skills? What's the story? Build it, context, action, result.
All right. Next question I have is, what are some challenges to working in industry versus working in academia from personal experience?
Well, you know, in industry, you have to produce a product. But you know what? In academia, you do too. You have to produce, you have to get grants in academia. You have to produce papers. You have to make presentations. It's really not that different. You're just a different environment. So I think the biggest difference is in academia, we try for the perfect solution. So we're going to research everything and figure out what's the theoretical best solution to a particular problem. In industry, if we don't make a product or produce a service and we don't do it in a timely manner, you don't make money. So everybody loses their job because the company goes broke. So there's more pressure to get the product to market. So it may not be perfect, but is it good enough? So it's a difference in philosophy. So in industry, you're trying to make a good product, but not a perfect product. In academia, we're usually trying to make the perfect product or to describe the perfect service.
All right, next question. It kind of got alluded to a little bit at the beginning, but do you need to have a PhD to have a research role in industry?
No, but your role will change. So PhDs are generally going to be managers. They will have different technicians or other people working for them. In a smaller company, that may not be the case. It may be that they need you for a specific technical knowledge. So it's possible to do that. But the more they're paying for you, the more skills you have, which are kind of the same thing. That's why they would pay you more. They usually want to leverage that. And one PhD can keep several engineers and technicians busy, right? So they can go get the data, they can go do the research while you analyze it and figure out the next thing to do. Now, if you like working in the field, then you may not want to be a PhD in industry because you might not get to go into the field. It varies from company to company, organization to organization, but The people at the bachelor's level are going to be the ones that are out there gathering the samples, trudging through the rivers to get to see, to make the observations and gather the data, right? Masters are somewhere in between. So in some organizations, they're treated like bachelor's level people. Some organizations, they have a special role because of their degree level. Some organizations, they're treated like PhDs and may have a management responsibilities as well.
All right, so one final question, but before I get to it, I'm just going to let everybody know the slides are available if you want them in the handout tab, and also you'll be able to find them. They'll be put up later today when the recording becomes available. If you go to the same site to get that you went to register for the webinar. So the final question here before we leave, Dave, is all of my professional contacts are in academia. How do I meet the necessary contacts in industry to get hired?
Yeah, so get out there and meet some people. One of the ways, it sounds silly, but that's really it. And be aware of all the people you meet. So it may not be directly the industry person, right? Your professors probably know some people in industry. Other students, we talked about the percentage of new grads that end up in industry. Well, they started out where you are. So keep track of all the graduates from bachelor's graduates, master's graduates, PhD graduates from your institution. Where did they end up? If you got trained in the same way that they did, chances are that company or that organization may want you too. Reach out to them on LinkedIn. So build your network, even if you don't like them right now. You know, it's a small world. After a while, you'll be able to get over whatever was bothering you at grad school, and you may like them again. Either way, knowing them could give you access to somebody else. So you saw on my LinkedIn profile, I didn't have a one-to-one relationship with anybody at Alcoa, but through the people I knew, I could get to the people at Alcoa and get a recommendation or a referral, right? So the more you build up your network, the better. The last person that I hired, the last contractor I hired here was a communications person that I met at the gym when I was waiting for a spin class. You know, it was boring. We had to get in line because I like to get on the bike in the front. I don't want to look at everybody else's backside. So I was in line for a while, and she was next to me, and we got to talking. And it turns out she was really good at the kind of communications and marketing that we needed. So we brought her on as a contractor. So you can find those contacts anywhere that there are people. Make sure you're talking to people at conferences. If that's hard for you, we'll have some tips. I won't give you all of them right now on networking. I think we go into it in our interviewing webinars, as well as I think it was interviewing 101 in EOS. And so get out there and meet some people.
Yeah. All right, great. So we're over time now, so I want to thank everybody for coming. And as Dave mentioned, if you go to pathfinder.aju.org or visit our blog on the job, you'll find some great resources there to help you with these the job hunt. And we hope to see you again. Our next webinar is going to be 10th of May. You can check out the rest of the schedule at webinars.aju.org. Thanks again for everybody for attending, and thank you, Dave.
All right, thanks everybody.